Unangilam ka Congress Legislature Party Dr. Mukul sangma ong baka Sorkar kade bansngap ya borok Jingsngewkhia bla deki hun ki beper la kalong negi seng Tremon Sobha negi seng san perthei la negi rushimet bat kamde bakan shim bagi jingpunsmo jungkwe kade ke jing Kdew kti ne Kynnoh ya ka Sorkar namar hagani katma persha u nongshun ubamla banyu I ha banyetre rengkat bat ha bansngap ya ki jing ajingbot Ulong baka lockdown kade kawai ni kilat banyak kon hak ni katma pantela kam ya kejing posted jong yang jingpang bad haba penjeri ya ka lockdown kamut bade banyo ya ka por ban penkre susu ya kejing kon banchu penleno hak bau la banrap bahadu menta keladon kejing penserwaka ya ka por Menteri rang ba bare mulong baka Kongres kala ajing mut ya ka Sorkar panyada na ka jingsha punjulor ke bebon hakum kene kapor ban light na ka jingdu gi minsim ke bakodor na ka jingsha lingshop ha ka klam.
None of the measures in isolation is going to work. When we are fighting against a pandemic of this nature, you will have to have multi-pronged approach, a very comprehensive multi-pronged approach. That's why the complete planning strategy, like when you are going to a war, when you know that there is an impending war, you'll be compelled to go to the war. Then there are innumerable things which one has to do, starting from minute details of information pertaining to the enemy, to determine their strength, weaknesses, likelihood of, the fallout of any conflict, and auditing one's own resources, arsenal, and preparedness. Are we prepared? What are the likely challenges? What are the likely unforeseen elements of surprises? Those are things. So this is something like that, so nothing, no measure in isolation will suffice. To be really, really frank. That's why I have, if you remember, in immediately after the initial lockdown, when the first wave started in the country, I have shared about what we have learned from the past, what we have learned from the past pandemics, and how we can leverage upon those knowledge which we have, and based on that, how we are placed now. What are the bigger challenges? As you compare with the past and now, you have a bigger challenges of population density, the mobility of the people, then the overall movement of the people, which is based on various activities which was limited in the preceding centuries. So all those things. And any pandemic, particularly when we are talking about a pandemic of this nature, of a highly infectious virus, from the scientific perspective, we are always advised that the virus is likely to mutate. Now, mutation of virus will also come with certain element of surprises, whether it becomes more lethal or whether it becomes less lethal. Those element of surprises will always be there. Therefore, as we are saying that when we are looking at an impending war, inevitable war, how we have to be prepared is how we have to be prepared. So, as I have said, stitch in time saves nine. So everything has to be done on time. That's the reason why we try to urge upon the government that every concern expressed by citizens, anybody, whether it's an elected member or members belonging to any civil society or any individual, as a concerned citizen, are trying to reach out to the government, draw the attention of the government, and articulating their concern, they must take cognizance. They must not end up saying, hey, okay, you're pointing fingers at us. It's a blame game. No, that is a wrong approach, because everybody must be taken on board and must be carried forward as a team, because this war is not a war which can be fought like a conventional war. It's a war against a virus, unknown, unseen enemy. So how the virus is going to behave after the mutation, and keeping in mind the likelihood of now first wave, second wave, third wave, fourth wave, how they are going to ultimately manifest itself as a disease. So all those things are important. Therefore, ramping up. Lockdown is one aspect of multi-pronged measures, and it is only to arrest the speed of transmission and gain more time. More time for what? More time to prepare. So we'll have to look at whether we are using those precious times to prepare or whether we are wasting the time. Today what I see is that we have wasted time. We should therefore learn from this past, but these are very painful experience. When these experiences are associated with loss of precious life of our dear ones, we must be able to save every single life. But if we are not able to save lives, then you can understand the pain associated with loss of life. So therefore, as we move forward, our efforts should be to minimize the loss of life, to minimize the sufferings, to minimize the crippling effect on the society, on the individuals, on the families due to the pandemic. Because this pandemic is going to leave behind a trail of, miseries, sufferings, pain. And therefore, how to have the preventive measures when we are dealing with disaster. Because again, to have an understanding, the COVID-19 pandemic has been notified by Government of India as a national disaster. So if it is notified as a national disaster, then how are you going to be prepared to prevent the kind of damage due to an impending disaster? Prevent the loss of life, likely loss of assets, properties, like that, So there is a complete comprehensive disaster management plan. Those are available for the government to use as a, source of informations to amplify their measures, which is required to be put in place. And that is exactly what we are telling them. Like, dealing with the disaster is not only dealing to mitigate when the disaster strikes, but the preparedness to ensure that when the disaster strikes, there is minimum damage, minimum loss of life. That is how we plan. Prevent those type of disaster which we can prevent, like fire accident. They can be prevented, but earthquake you cannot prevent. Cyclone you cannot prevent. These are not within the control of mankind. So the nature's fury when it comes. But then you have to have measures put in place as a part of the comprehensive plan to minimize the likelihood damage in the inevitability of those kind of disasters. So that is precisely how our approach has to be, because the pandemic, the only thing is that I'm afraid probably people can presume that the pandemic is almost over, while the war is still on, declaring that you have emerged victorious. But the war is still on. That's where we must understand that war is still on. This wave, after this third wave, how fast the third wave is going to come, we have to prepare. We have to ensure that, okay, we look at all the possibilities and therefore put all the comprehensive measures. See, that's why I have said that the measures must be looked at as a comprehensive measures, not in isolation. And therefore, take all the concerns, all the suggestions into cognizance and look at how all the measures should be put in place. And that is the overall discussion that we had. And yes, the government has said that they have taken note of all those concerns and taken cognizance of, they will take cognizance of this. And many more suggestions will keep on coming from the concerned citizens, because during this kind of short discussion, it is not possible for all of us also to flag all the concerns. Therefore, those concerns which are required to be articulated to draw the attention of the government and get the course correction from the side of the government will have to continue to come. Therefore, there should not be any tendency from the side of the government to point a finger at anybody, any individual, saying that, okay, you are engaging in blame game. No, certain deficiencies when pointed out must be taken into cognizance, and appropriate course correction wherever needed must be resorted to. I have shared with you now only that when you are trying to break the transmission chain, breaking the transmission chain gives you scope to minimize the number of cases and have enough time. And this time, what do you do with this time? Since you know that the war is not yet over, since the war need to be continued, an enemy is in your vicinity, enemy is already preparing to attack you. Therefore, that time must be utilized for the comprehensive preparation. That's what I'm saying. That's why stitch in time saves nine. articulating the concerns, the felt areas where they need to really focus and have course correction, and further look at measures to be put in place. So discussions revolve around that. Since what they have done was whatever they have done, but we have added, we have suggested, we have articulated all the concerns. That means, in addition to what they are doing, there are many things that is required to be done. That is what we have said. That is what I am saying, that the concerns, whatever has been articulated, must be taken cognizance of, and appropriate measures should be put in place to ensure that we save lives. We come victorious from this war against this virus. We come victorious means at the end of the day with minimum suffering, minimum trail of loss and suffering to the people, as we are confronted by this second wave and inevitable subsequent waves. If somebody has contracted the virus, and if the person who has contracted the virus ultimately create a situation when he again facilitate other people to contract the virus, virus will have more and more host. Virus will have the whole scope to replicate itself, and therefore you are only strengthening the enemy. You are only strengthening the virus to have the strike at their will. So allowing anybody who has contracted the virus to be there where your surveillance system does not contain him properly, you are only allowing the enemy to be having the upper hand. That is where you will end up having too many surprises, meaning the surprises in the form of unanticipated spike or surge in cases. This is exactly what you are seeing. Whatever has happened in Maharashtra or Delhi, it's same thing. So we must learn from other states, since whatever is happening there is at least happening before it happens here. So we have this precious time, though it is short, it must be utilized.